Hello and welcome to York Universe, the astronomy and astrophysics radio podcast written and presented by the students, faculty, alumni, and friends of York University. You'll find us now wherever podcasts are distributed. I'll be one of your hosts this evening. I'm Dr. Elena Hyde, and I am joined tonight by Julie Tomei and a very special guest, Brendan O'Brien, who will be introducing shortly. We are broadcasting live from the Allan Carswell Observatory, located at York University in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. York Universe broadcasts live every Monday night at 9 p.m. local Toronto time or Tuesday morning at 2 a.m. UT if that's more your speed. The broadcast runs in concert with our online public viewing program run by the amazing Observatory team, and that's over on YouTube or York U Observatory on YouTube. And if you're joining us live, you can ask them questions in the YouTube chat. To navigate to the live show or find out more, check out our website at yorku.ca/science/observatory and follow the links to OPV for online public viewing, or you can just click on any of the website links that go to YouTube and they'll all take you to our channel. If you have any questions or comments about past shows and of course suggestions for future topics, you can always email us at observe@yorku.ca, and you can find us over on Instagram with the handle YorkU Observatory and Facebook at Allan Carswell Obs. All of our programs are free, but this holiday season we do have a special fundraiser going on in addition to our regular donations drive. So I'm going to just take a quick moment of the introduction here to let everyone know that the Allan Carswell Observatory does run primarily on volunteer efforts, and that includes, of course, fundraising. So this fundraiser season, we are doing our first ever online fundraiser drive. This is to help the observatory run tours, repairs, and more. And the fundraiser page has special events, prizes, and goals. We are running a special games event over on YouTube on December 18th of this week. And if you go to that same website, yorku.ca/science/observatory, you can navigate over to the fundraiser and find out all the amazing things that we plan to do if we reach our 5,000 Canadian dollar goal, which include continuing the free tours through April, putting up some free online swag because everyone loves free things, getting new free bookmarks to be given out at the observatory tours for weekly events, and it will include, of course, a free prize drawing from each of the raffles that are now running on the fundraiser website. That's right, there are multiple raffles. You can enter to win a private tour for you and 5 of your friends. You can enter to win a supported observation raffle where we, the Allan Carswell Observatory crew, will actually support your observing run completely, help you get it as long as it's possible, and the data will be your own. And there is a one-time only super swag raffle, which will feature the new Daydreaming in the Solar System book by York professors Jesse Rogerson and John Morse, as well as our zippable tote bag, the coffee mug, the poster, and the 2025 calendar. That one you can only give away once because we only have one book. So all of those raffles will be drawn at the fundraising goal or on January 5th. So we are hoping to hit that $5,000 Canadian goal mark. And if you want to see how far along we are, you can actually go and look. I have updated the goal progress bar fairly recently. And of course, if you just want to make a regular donation, you can always use that donate to the observatory button that's on the main site as well as the fundraiser site. So very, very exciting time. And of course, the holiday season being upon us. This is actually the last York Universe broadcast radio podcast for 2024. Very, very exciting. Tonight we are, of course, looking at the weather, which doesn't look terribly good in Toronto, and we're very excited to be bringing you a new, and I believe never before heard on York Universe guest. So, Brendan O'Brien, welcome to York Universe Radio Show. It's great to have you on, and just give you a little introduction here. On fair, I suppose, fair caveat. Brendan also has a podcast, which everyone should go and check out. It's Astrophiz, and he does two big episodes every month. He has interviews with leading astrophysicists and experts from around the world. And he also has a chat with Dr. Ian Astroblog Musgrave on the first of every month for a sky guide, and that's at astrophiz.com. So Brendan, as an educator and a fellow astronomy podcaster, it's so great to have you here tonight.
Thank you very much, Elena. It's such a pleasure to catch up with you again and to talk with you from deep down in down under land in Victoria up to Toronto. Greetings.
Yes, absolutely. And I do have to say, the last time I think we did a podcast collaboration, we were both in Australia, and now, of course, I'm in Canada and you're in Australia. So I hesitate to ask you, how is the weather where you are today?
Well, there's probably a lot of degrees difference because yesterday our Bureau of Meteorology predicted we'd have 43 degrees centigrade, but it was only 37 yesterday. So it was quite a cool day. It wasn't the 43 they predicted. Meanwhile, up there in Toronto, you're probably in the minus degrees somewhere.
Yes, we had some snow and it melted, and now it's coming back. So the real key thing is, though, how clear are the skies? Because that's what really helps you get the telescopes out. And unfortunately, I will have to say, for the online public viewing, it looks like we won't be able to open the Allan Carswell Observatory telescope tonight because we are actually still getting, and let me just check, rain and sleet and ice coming down.
Gross.
So I believe it's actually coming down as frozen rain. So we can't
Oh.
open the telescope at the moment.
Ah, that's no good. You could send it down to me. We've got beautiful clear skies. I'm in a very dark sky area. It's called Bortle Class 2, which is almost
Woo.
perfect skies. But yeah, look, I hope the weather clears up for you a bit in Toronto and your the people online can get a chance to look up into the heavens with you.
Yes, Bordeaux Class 2 is not something that we can manage, but we do have some partners out in Ontario in the Killarney Provincial Park, which is a similar condition in terms of its dark sky because it's very, very far from any large cities like Toronto or large football stadiums like York University. But yes, getting into dark skies can definitely help. I don't know if shipping a 1 meter telescope is really on the cards, but if
Ah,
it
very
was,
good.
I would consider it, yes.
Yes, otherwise.
Absolutely. Now we've got all kinds of things planned for today. We have a bunch of different sort of Australian fun astronomy history, and I thought it would also be quite fun to talk a little bit about some of your own experiences in astronomy. And since we usually start off with history in this particular show, why don't we go and look a little bit of some really fun stuff? Now, I think we've talked about this before on this show because it's just super interesting. But this week in space and astronomy history, approximately. So I'm going to fudge a little bit and go back to 5 December 2020. The Hayabusa 2 reentry capsule landed in Woomera. And this is really interesting because it landed in the Woomera test range in Australia. Do you know about that one, Brendan?
Yes, and also we pronounce it Woomera.
Oh dear. Yeah, but despite being Australian and having lived there for 10 years, my pronunciation is still not very good. So thank
Yes,
you very much.
it's an indigenous name, and that test range is basically still on indigenous land in South Australia.
Yeah, yeah, and of course it was a really interesting mission when it came back. The I'm probably saying this one wrong too, Hayabusa 2 reentry capsule recovery. This was a mission by the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency, or JAXA. And of course, getting it, getting the gas out of the capsule was, uh, you know, pretty interesting because this was considered from the asteroid Ryugu. They were hoping to capture some sort of, original components, I suppose, there. And I know it has some crossover with one of the items that you mentioned before. Of course, in the and you'll have to help me again. Woomera,
Woomera, yes, and
Woomera.
yeah,
This was
and there's
a missile range in South Australia in the 1950s as well.
yes, and basically, I can fill you in a bit there on that if you like. It was originally, I'm just scrolling through my notes here. Oh, look, from memory, it was originally a place where the British tested and the Americans, they tested some nuclear devices there in the 1950s. And it then became a ranging station for putting up orbital uh, missions for NASA and some other countries. And it's got a long history, but unfortunately, Australia dropped the ball, and we'll talk about that a bit later. But yes, the Woomera range is still being used. It was tested last year, they tested scramjets from there. So it's got a long history. And being partially in a desert area, it's a great place to send back any samples from missions, and that's what the Japanese mission did. It sent back its samples, and they landed in the desert, and they were very happy to collect them because in that sort of country, everything that lands there stands out, and it's easy to find things because it's a fairly bland desert.
Yeah, and I mean, being able to have a large location that is that kind of, sort of flat and semi-uniform makes it not only easy to, of course, find things like, capsules that might be landing from interesting agencies, but I know that your tie-in with the 1950s and Australia launching rockets for itself with that missile range in South Australia, there's an interesting tie-in to me as well because a lot of the old science fiction stories, and I have a penchant for old science fiction stories that were written around that time in the 40s and 50s, actually did focus on Australia as potential launching place for going to the moon, for example. And there was some, I forget who it was. Gosh, I'll have to look up the story later. But it was actually thought that it might expand substantially, and unfortunately it didn't. But for a while, it was an incredibly popular location,
Yes,
and I
and
mean,
also,
it still is a bit.
and a lot of our universities send their young PhDs out into the desert because we've got a lot of astro-related courses at the universities here, and uh, finding meteorites in the desert is particularly productive. And these
Oh
PhD
yeah.
these PhD students go out to another one of our deserts as their favourite. It's called the Nullarbor Desert, which literally means no trees. And in the Nullarbor, there's lots of meteorites being found there, all different varieties, and there's some beautiful science research happening uh, just because the desert is a great place to find things.
Yeah, and of course, Australia being, one of the oldest sort of accessible pieces of land on Earth, means that you get some really cool stuff out there. So yeah, anyways, great, great Woomera tie-in. And of course, if folks are interested in the Hayabusa 2 reentry capsule, I don't know what follow-up mission they're up to now, but it was a great success. So the asteroid Ryugu, which is got a few different numbers assigned to it. This was a pretty fun little, sample return mission, and we haven't seen a lot of sample return missions succeed yet, but they are becoming slowly more popular. So the Hayabusa 2 actually did survey the asteroid for about a year and a half and collect samples and return those samples to Earth, which is kind of a crazy idea. And if folks have heard about, the sci-fi version of like asteroid farming and, bringing precious mineral asteroids, back to Earth, this was a small sample fraction of an asteroid, and it was a success, but it was also, a fairly expensive mission to do. So you wouldn't be able to bring back a whole asteroid this way. But it is still really fun because, of course, this is primordial material, presumably from the beginning of the solar system, and you can get into all kinds of fun stuff about solar system begins and all that good stuff as well. Now we've got so many fun things we can talk about. Let's go ahead and look at a couple other fun Australia things from, I think we've got at least one more. Julie, you found a great one,
Did.
which actually is Honeysuckle Creek, right?
Yeah, Honeysuckle Creek Tracking Station. I wasn't able to find an exact date, but December of 1981 was when that tracking station was closed. The Honeysuckle Creek Tracking Station was a NASA Earth station near Canberra, Australia. It opened in 1967 and had a 26-meter dish. It was instrumental to the Apollo program and received and relayed the first TV footage of Neil Armstrong stepping onto the moon in July of 1969. Along with the Canberra Deep Space Communications Complex at Tidbinbilla, it had communication and telemetry contact with the Eagle lander and the Columbia command modules. The initial attempt to receive images at Goldstone in California were hampered by operator error and poor scan conversion settings. So they wound up switching to Honeysuckle Creek instead. The Parkes antenna was more powerful, but the angle of its dish was not in line to receive signals during the first 7 minutes of the lunar landing. So Honeysuckle Creek was it. Parkes did receive pictures later during the lunar landing. Honeysuckle Creek and Tidbinbilla antennas were built and run by NASA, but staffed by Australians, as it was a government policy that the director had to be a citizen or a permanent resident, and that the staff had to be Australians. At the end of the Apollo program in 72, Honeysuckle Creek was redirected to the Skylab program and was used in experiments with scientific stations that were placed on the moon by the Apollo astronauts. In 1974, at the end of the Skylab program, Honeysuckle Creek was connected to the Deep Space Network and given the designation Deep Space Station 44. After the closure of Honeysuckle Creek, the antenna was relocated to Tidbinbilla and became Deep Space Station number 46. The antenna was decommissioned in late 2009 and declared a historical aerospace site by the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics and remains at Tidbinbilla in perpetuity. At the Honeysuckle Creek site, all that remains there today is the concrete foundations of the tracking station.
Yes, and there's a fabulous movie called The Dish,
Yeah.
and it stars Sam Neill. It's a lovely movie. It tells the story of how those iconic first steps on the moon were captured and transmitted to the world via Honeysuckle Creek and the Parkes dish, which is the Murrayang Parkes dish. It's a 64-metre dish in central New South Wales. And the movie, anyone can watch it anytime. It's free to watch. It's there on the Internet Archive, and you can catch it at tinyurl.com/the dish 2000, all lowercase, all one word. The dish, and then the number 2000.
Yeah, it was a great movie. We actually had an event to watch it with the astronomy club when I was still a student at York.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so good. I 100% recommend this movie to everybody as well. So this is, I think we could give our official like 5-star reviews to this movie, but
Thumbs
we're
up.
all a little bit biased.
Yeah.
And of course, the parks was heavily featured in that movie, and I think it was on the cardboard cutout that was in the physics department at Macquarie University when I was doing my PhD. So great stuff. And of course, Parks has been involved in so many other things as well. It would be hard to list them all. Um, but do you remember when exactly honeysuckle sort of was fully removed? Was it kind of removed right away at the end of 1974?
No, I
Uh,
don't.
it
I'm
wasn't
not
until
sure.
81 that it was moved.
Yep. Now, while we're talking about the Parkes dish, they're still doing wonderful work there. It's been continually upgraded and refurbished, and the most recent change is that they've put in cryogenic ultra-wide bandwidth receivers on it, and they're doing fantastic pulsar work out of Parkes now. And the Murrayang dish at Parkes is just doing lovely pulsar timing array work. So they're mapping pulsars in the southern skies, and uh, in the future, those pulsars will probably become part of a GPS navigation system, but that's a whole different story.
Yeah, and it is if you are able to make it out to Parks, New South Wales, Australia, I can first of all heartily recommend it, and second of all, they do actually have a visitor center as well, and I believe it used to be that you could watch the telescope dish move from the visitor center. I don't know if they still kind of have that open
Oh, yes.
access. Yeah?
Yes,
Okay.
that's still there. And the staff there are fantastic. They put on regular shows there during the holiday seasons, and they do get a lot of school groups there, and a lot of tourists come through. Those that are brave enough to travel down the Newell Highway from say Narrabri down to Canberra. So yeah, it's a great trip. I did a road trip up there and went to every radio telescope on the east coast of Australia. A fantastic time and a lovely part of a country.
That sounds like a great road trip to go on.
I'm adding parks to my list of things whenever I make it to Australia. It's on
Oh
my
yeah,
list.
you're
I
gonna have
don't
a
think,
very long list.
yeah, well, I don't think I can convince my family that going to every radio telescope is a way to spend a vacation, but I can get one in there.
It's a pretty good one, and they do have some fun crossovers with I would say, some more, I mean, back to science fiction a little bit, but they are part of that breakthrough listen as well, I believe. So
Yes.
they're
Yep.
they're out there searching for radio signals from extraterrestrial technologies as well.
Yes, and that sort of work's happening in the background 24/7. They don't have to uh, point the dish in any particular direction to do that breakthrough listen work.
It's cool.
Excellent. Yeah, so we've got all kinds of great stuff to go visit in Australia now. And I thought, maybe we might just take a little break and probably do some news items too. But I thought before we got too far, Brendan, I just thought it would be fun since you haven't been on the show before. Would you mind telling us a little bit about how you actually got started in astronomy outreach?
Oh, look, I'm basically a science nerd. I've been involved with science and science education for a long time, and I just wanted to learn about radio astronomy. And I live out here on a rural farm, a long way from universities in our capital cities. And I did a online master's degree in IT, and I wasn't entirely happy with the online learning environments at that stage. I know there's some terrific online learning environments where you could learn radio astronomy, but I thought the best way for me to learn about radio astronomy would be to produce a niche podcast and interview practicing astronomers. I've, and here we are. We're doing interview number 206 now. I've been doing this since 2016, and I've loved learning a little bit by osmosis by basically talking with practicing researchers each month. And as much as I'd like to be one myself, I'm not actually a scientist, but I'm in total awe of scientists and the way they think and their generosity in the way they share their ideas with me. Uh, yeah, and I'm an special admirer of astronomers and radio astronomers in particular. Wonderful people. Highly recommended that you get to know astronomers.
Well, I can only endorse that statement. Julie, what do you think?
I give astronomers 10 out of 10. Would
Well,
recommend.
and of course, I think that's a great way to highlight one of the things that we always like to talk about on, I think, this show and other, science outreach types of stuff. It's really wonderful to be able to share the excitement, to be able to share some of the discovery. And if you really love any aspect of astronomy or science in general, you're absolutely in the right place because you'll always find those other people who are just as enthusiastic about it, and it's really a wonderful thing to engage with. So I think that comes across really, really well. Um, and of course, you do great work over on your podcast, I have to say. Um,
Thank you, but it's really all down to the generosity of the researchers. They're just so busy, and yet I've noticed over the last few years there's a a lot of awareness on how important outreach is to active researchers. They don't want to get buried totally in their work. They're very happy to share their ideas and their discoveries with the general public because they know that ultimately a lot of the funding comes from taxpayers and they want to give back. So I've found astronomers to be a very generous and astute group of people to talk with.
Well, I'm certainly glad to have you on this show. On speaking of astronomers and astronomical events, are there any that really stand out to you? Do you have any real favorite astronomical events from the last few years or so?
Well, my favourites go back quite a long time, and for the mathematically minded, someone could probably work out how old I am because the first astronomical event that I remembered is when Sputnik 1 passed over our house. I was living in Mansfield, Victoria, which is in a couple of 100 miles away from Melbourne. And I was 4 years old at the time, and my brother and I were allowed to stay up late until 7:30 p.m. To watch this Sputnik go over our house. And my mother was quite disappointed that the satellite we saw was white, just like a moving star. And it wasn't red. And because all the newspapers at the time and the radio, everyone was talking about this red satellite that was going to pass overhead that night. And that's my earliest memory. And yeah, so anything that came out of the Soviet Union at that time was called red. Um, Probably because of the colour of their flag at the time. Then, after that, the next thing I remember is the 1976 total solar eclipse. And once again, I was out on a farm with a lot of mates. And what was really spooky was the way all the birds and animals, they went totally quiet and still. And it was really spooky. And then a bit later in 86, seeing a Halley's Comet when I was camping out in the bush. That was awesome to see that famous one and to know that I'd probably be dead when it comes around again. So that's always, astronomy puts you in your place. It lets you know just how important you are. But most recently, we had a perfect and spectacular view of Comet Lovejoy, and that was in Christmas Eve. The anniversary is coming up soon in 2011. And I got the whole family out of bed. So here we are at 4:30 a.m. in the morning. Um, and there it was. Comet Lovejoy was just hanging up there in the sky. And it took most of the western sky. And for me, it was much more spectacular than Halley's Comet. But just recently, Julie and Elena, just 2 months ago, we went out and we captured an aurora. We've had a lot of fabulous auroras, the sun
Mhm.
going really active at the moment in its 11-year cycle, and we captured it on camera for the first time. So that was quite inspiring. And for those who haven't captured auroras, you've got great opportunities up there, way up near the Arctic Circle. Um, there's a lot of fabulous online groups that anyone can join, and you can learn about capturing auroras and getting some great tips on what sort of camera settings to put in your camera, and including how to capture auroras on your smartphone. And there's some fabulous examples all over the interwebs. So yeah, another great thing to do for if you haven't got a telescope, go out and catch an aurora. This 24 and 25 are the top years in this 11-year cycle to capture auroras. Get out there, go on, get going, go now.
Well, not tonight in Toronto. It's too cloudy. But otherwise, yes, absolutely. I definitely recommend it. I actually saw just at the tiniest bit of aurora for the first time in my life this year. Because as you say, it's been really good. So watch your aurora watch and check your aurora warnings for your local neighborhood. It's you're probably not going to get a better chance outside of this next year or so.
Yep.
Yeah, I was able to catch some with my kids too. They weren't spectacular. I zigged when I should have zagged. Uh, I went east, should have gone west. But we saw some, and they were both so inspired. And I mean, I've always loved catching astronomical things, but now that I can do it with my kids, it's even that much more awesome.
Absolutely. All right, I'm just going to go ahead and remind everyone, you are being reminded that you are in fact listening to York Universe. We are broadcasting live from the Allan Carswell Observatory located at York University in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. It is unfortunately a little bit cloudy tonight. So if you want to find out anything about our past shows or a little bit about our current ongoing observatory fundraiser, you can always see our website at yorku.ca/science/observatory. Tonight, you're listening to Julie Tomei, our amazing guest, Brendan O'Brien, all the way from Australia, and Dr. Alina Hyde. And we are currently discussing some really great not just Australian, but astronomical tips and history. So, just as a reminder, if you are joining us on the podcast, if you want to check out the live broadcast over on OPV for online public viewing, it's on YouTube, and you can always get there to that same website I mentioned before, yorku.ca/science/observatory. And while you're there, don't forget to hop over to that fundraiser and enter to win one of, or all three of, the different raffles that are going on over at Allan I. Carswell Observatory right now. All right, so we're about the halfway mark, and I think we've got time for a few more great sort of tips and questions for you, Brendan. I have just a few more. So I think your list of events was incredibly spectacular. I am actually very impressed with the Comet Lovejoy. I wish I had caught that one. But do you have any, on a little bit of a different note, do you have any tips for possible students or science communicators in training, people who are interested?
Oh, yeah, sure. Look, I've got an example, and that's just if you've got a SciComm idea, uh, and there's so many aspects, not just podcasting. With the internet now, there's so many opportunities for people to communicate their science in so many different ways. And I think the basic thing is just if you've got an idea of something that you might enjoy, just go ahead and do it. And a second tip is probably always strive to talk with people who are smarter and more experienced than you. And it's not hard. I found it's not hard to find people like that. And as I said earlier, they're, you know, working scientists are often surprisingly very generous with their time. And my Astrophys podcast could be a good example of those two strategies at work. And it's an absolute pleasure. And, finding people is particularly easy because for every interview I do, I ask them to nominate someone else who I might interview at a future date. And most people give me two or three names. So I've got a very long list of people who I can interview for years to come. And another great thing is that these lovely people, they scream their insatiable thirst for new knowledge. They're just fantastic. And I've met a few of them in real life, but most of them I've just met over the interwebs. And it's been a real genuine pleasure to follow their careers and to see them gaining their PhDs, their postdocs, their fellowships, and their professorships, because I've interviewed undergraduates and engineers and people that don't have positions, and then to watch the trajectory of their careers is just lovely. And you're another good example. I've been following your career since our first interview, Elena, and I really thought um, in that first interview, you talked a lot about Python coding, and I thought, oh, yes, she's going to end up being a big coder. But it turns out you're still doing that, but now you're an assistant professor at York University and you're resident director of their Allan Carswell Observatory in Toronto. So it's been a great pleasure watching yours and everyone else's stellar careers. And in your case, Elena, I won't be asking what's next for Doc Hyde because I love surprises. I just keep on watching your career, Elena.
Yeah, well, I have to admit some of it's surprised me as well. So, it's not surprises are not necessarily a bad thing. And absolutely, I agree that it's really wonderful to be able to find out where folks end up, and how many varied and different sorts of career paths they can go on to, and then you catch up with them later and go, oh wow, there you are.
Yeah.
Um, so it is, and I know Julie, if we want to just make a plug, you were on the infrared socks episode not too long ago.
I was.
Do you remember how many episodes ago was that now?
Um,
Like
I was a couple,
three,
oh, more than
four?
that.
A
I'll
few
look it up.
episodes ago.
Yeah, I think it's
Um,
sometime in October, maybe.
yeah, my sense of time and space is gone. But yeah, the infrared socks were the softball team, I want to
Yep.
say.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was I would always get the softball and the baseball confused. But softball team of undergraduates and people,
Just grad students and some
grad students,
undergraduates. Yeah.
miscellaneous over at York University back in the day. And I think we got, um, it seemed like 10, but there was probably only six.
I think there were
Um,
eight. Let's see. Two, four, six, eight. Yeah.
eight of them. Okay, so we
Yeah.
did get eight of them.
Yeah. And it was in
Um,
October.
okay, well there you go then. If you're looking for that one, it was infrared socks. So if you like that kind of thing, uh, it's always fun to pull in some of those, because that was all about their career paths, and it kind of went very 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 fast because there was eight, but I think Robin is preparing some sort of follow-up episode.
Should be
um,
digging into the broomball team next, maybe.
I didn't know there was broomball, but that sounds amazing. Um, so let's go ahead and we've got one, I think, what did I say? We probably have more than one, but at least one more question for Brendan here. So just to keep you on your toes, we've got one more for you, and this is maybe the hardest question, but I thought it would be fun to ask you, do you currently have a favorite telescope, either large or small?
That is a hard question because we really are in the golden age of astronomy in terms of the instrumentation that's out there in every wavelength. There's amazing things now, and most of the interviews I've been doing over the last 2 years, uh, the raves that I get from researchers about the JWST, the James Webb Space Telescope, they are just beside themselves.
Oh yeah.
Uh, what it's producing, the science that's coming out of them is just astonishing and will be for many years to come. And then we can look forward to the Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope, and that's being launched. It's being tested in final construction phases as we speak, and it's being launched in about 2 years' time, and it's got some beautiful capabilities. We know that James Webb does this beautiful infrared and near infrared work. Well, the Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope is going to be a much wider field of view in those infrared and near infrared wavelengths, which is particularly good for seeing things at a very distance, very long way away in both space and time. And it's going to be great to see it come online. And then in on terms of Earth telescopes, we've got the extremely large telescope that's in construction at the moment, and it will have first light in about 3 years' time. and it's huge. It's over near the Atacama Desert in Chile, and it's got a 40-meter primary mirror, adaptive optics. It's got a camera that weighs 4 tons, and
Wow.
it will be changing Earth-based optical astronomy for many decades to come. And meanwhile, over here in my little arid patch of land, I've got a 6-inch Newtonian, yes, I know you're jealous, reflector that does quite well for its size, mainly because, as I said before, I'm underneath portal class 2 skies. So yes, I'm very lucky. And meanwhile, I'm sure, Julie and Elena, that we could do a whole episode on the growing burden of light pollution and how it impacts on optical astronomy, because my closest town is 30 kilometres away, and I used to be able to just see the glow from the town, but um, in the last 2 years, they've built a 24-hour concrete factory to make the concrete lining for uh, the new road tunnels that are being built all underneath the city of Melbourne. So I'm getting impacted by um, my optical astronomy is being impacted by light pollution. So I'm not happy about that factory. And another thing, I'm going to be doing an episode soon about international space law and how ineffective it is, because what we've got now, we're going to have the potential to have the radio equivalent of pollution happening and impacting on our radio telescopes like the SKA, because we've got these huge constellations of tens of thousands of low Earth orbit satellites being put up by competing companies all over the world, and the skies are getting pretty pretty clouded. But those swarms of low Earth orbit satellites also talk to each other, and they talk to the ground via radio. And our radio telescopes and our spider arrays in the SKA can pick up those transmissions, and it produces a sort of fog. So it's going to be a big challenge for radio astronomers to work out how to see through uh, those swarms of satellites and their radio RFI, their frequency interference, and to see their distant targets. So, yeah, there's a lot of great opportunities happening in this golden age of astronomy, and also some incredibly great challenges as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a subject near and dear to all of us in astronomy, is the various kinds of light pollution, visible light, radio light, and of course we've seen the pictures. Was that Hubble Space Telescope got Starlinked, where they had one of the satellites fly in front of Hubble as it was taking a picture. So even satellites are not immune to being impacted by these sort of low Earth orbit swarms. And of course, the space junk problem is not resolved. And if and you know it's been pointed out many times, of course. But I think we'll be talking about this one for a while because it's definitely still a big problem.
Yes, a work in progress.
Absolutely. All right, so let's go and see if we can hit a couple fun news items. Um, I thought, it would be fun to talk a little bit about some of the SKA and some of the telescopes down there. I know you had some items, but there was one that came out in the news fairly recently with the SKA low arrays, and this is um, sort of still under construction. But the SK Low array has now partnered in from Australia with Germany, India, and South Africa now partnering as of December 2024. And you were mentioning that it's actually quite a bit larger than that now.
Yes, it's fantastic news. The SKA has got a long history. It's been a work in progress for decades now, and it's just coming online as we speak. And it's great to have India, the most recent country to come on board. And so the full roll call as we speak is in alphabetical order because we can't have favourites. Australia, Canada, China, Germany, India, Italy, the Netherlands, Portugal, South Africa, Spain, Switzerland, and the UK. And they've all got their hands in their pockets and they're paying for this great bit of infrastructure to be built in both Australia and down in the Karoo Desert in South Africa, where the SKA Mid is happening. And here in Australia, the SKA Low is based on the Murchison Widefield Array, which has been working for many years now. It's basically an array of thousands of spider antennas, and you can find them online. There's a beautiful design, and that data from the tiles, the spider antennas, is it's correlated in a building on site in the desert there in a radio quiet zone. Basically, they've built this huge Faraday cage for the computers and the technicians to live and work in. And then they send all of that data down to Perth, where it sits on a Cray supercomputer. And from there, researchers all over the world, they download the data they want and do their research that way. But as we speak, yesterday morning, as most of Australia slept, uh, we had a small CSIRO team, that's our national science body. They were hard at work. You mentioned earlier the Canberra Deep Space Tracking Station at Tinbilla, near Canberra, and they were talking to the Europa Clipper, which is a fantastic mission, and they've just made contact with it. It's on its way uh, to Jupiter to talk to probe Enceladus, I believe, and uh, this Europa Clipper that was launched from Cape Canaveral, it's on its mission. And so we're talking to it from Canberra. So there's some great work happening out in the Murchison Desert and at Tidbilla. It's a beautiful name. I've been there. It's a wonderful place, and another place with a great education facility there for visitors. So for anyone from Toronto who comes out to Australia, make sure you go to Tidbilla and see those huge dishes that work for NASA and JPL, and talk to, I think they're talking to about 40 spacecraft as we speak. And any spacecraft that pass into the southern hemisphere plane, they have to talk to Canberra.
Yeah, it's great stuff. And of course, like you say, there's so much going on. We'd have trouble to probably trouble to cover it all. But I think maybe one thing that our listeners might be curious about is that when we're talking about the Square Kilometre Array or the Murchison Wide Field Array, these radio telescopes are really, really different than what you might have imagined a telescope to look like. And
Oh,
if you
yes.
haven't seen a picture of them, definitely look up some pictures online, because if you saw the Parkes telescope dish, or you saw the movie The Dish, you have an idea that a radio telescope could look like a big dish, or an optical telescope. Most people have an idea what that might look like, but I can guarantee you, you probably haven't seen the spiders before.
They look like
They're
little trees.
so they do kind of look tree or spider-like. They're on these regular little grids, and they're arranged on a mesh steel mesh plane, and they've got um, I think each antenna has 16 dipoles, and that's on a tile, and then they sort of tile them together. And so, if you depending on the angle you look at it, it really does look very, very different, and it highlights, I think, just the different methods and technology that are needed to process radio light versus optical light, for example. So really, really um, fun technology. And
Yes,
of
and
course, if oh yeah,
I think the Murchison wide field array ones look a bit like spiders because they've got these hook legs going out
yeah,
all around them. Uh, the SKA low ones that are being installed there as we speak are more like metal Christmas trees. They're
Yeah.
fantastic.
yeah, that's true. And the differences in design are really, really interesting.
Oh, and also
Um,
you've got a fabulous one up there um, in
yeah,
Canada. You've got Chime, and Chime is
yes,
a beautiful thing. It's like um, it's a huge dish that's been run over by a steamroller, and you've got
yeah,
this
it looks
great
sliced.
long outrigger one. It's just beautiful. Chime is doing fantastic work.
Yes. And I think Chime will have to cover a different a different time. But yeah, Chime is over on the other coast, and they are doing great, great stuff as well. Lots of I think fast radio bursts.
Yep.
I'd have to check what their most recent press release was. But yes, absolutely. And I know that they have of course, the hydrogen mapping experiment is, I think, the big ongoing one over at Chime. But yeah, the square kilometer array, the Murchison wide field array. The other great thing about these Australian, I hesitate to call them telescopes, large installations of devices that detect light. They stretch on for ages, and they cover really wide areas. So you don't get a good impression of the true size of a facility without some sort of flyover. And there have been a few flyovers that they have. I don't know if I can recommend a video, but I know that they're out there somewhere. Do you have a favorite, Brendan?
Uh, Look, I also, in terms of films, no, but I'm sure any internet sleuth could find them quite easily. Another thing that's out there in the desert near the SKA low construction that's happening at the moment is an older one called ASCAP, which
Yes, ASCAP, yes.
ASCAP's a beautiful array of radio telescopes, the more traditional type of dish telescope, but that array um, is so sensitive it could pick up a mobile phone on Pluto. It's so sensitive. It's fantastic. And so um, I don't know whether it'll be working with the SKA mid that's being constructed out in the Karoo Desert in South Africa, but it's a similar design. It's an array of a dozen or so, I think, beautiful radio telescopes. And yes, there will be some flyover videos, but I haven't got one um, to give you right now. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's we will set it as a extra challenge for our listening audience to go and find it. I believe in all of you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we're just about running towards the end of out of time here. We have a few extra notes about, of course, that SKA low and the Murchison wide field array. You had mentioned when we were chatting before, of course, the problem with the satellite pollution, and that these sites are designed to be radio quiet zones. So these are all facilities. Maybe not all of them, but most of them will be under impact of these low Earth orbiting satellites, right?
Oh, absolutely, yes. And I know that one of our arrays, ASCAP, has been coordinating with a particular constellation of satellites, and they're trying to work out a way that when they point their telescopes in the ASCAP array at a particular part of the sky, they're hoping that the satellite, low Earth orbit satellite constellation can turn itself off temporarily or point the other way. There is some cooperation happening between the low Earth orbit constellation people and the radio telescopers, and hopefully they'll be able to work out a way of cooperating and clearing the air for that important research to be done.
I think clearing the air is a wonderful way to put it. Unfortunately, we are just about, we're actually out of time. So I do have to say thanks to everyone for joining us for this amazing episode of York Universe, the astronomy and astrophysics radio podcast written and presented by students, faculty, alumni, and friends of York University. The hosts this evening have been Julie Tomei and myself, Dr. Elena Hyde, and of course we have had Brendan O'Brien from Astrophys on as our special guest this evening. If you'd like to find out more about the Astrophys podcast that we've been talking about in this very episode, it's on astrophys.com, and you'll find much more of his wonderful work over there. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. You can always connect with us on Instagram at YorkU Observatory and Facebook at Allan I Carswell Obs. Check out our website for show notes, content updates, and of course, that ongoing fundraiser over at yorku.ca/science/observatory. Thanks for tuning in to York Universe. Clear skies and have a good night.